The sun was dipping beneath the horizon, casting long shadows over the crumbling remains of Viper's Creek, when Joseph Bruno felt the burning in his veins. It started as a subtle throb, then surged with a fiery vengeance, turning his blood to molten lead. Stumbling through the cursed clearing, he could barely hear his own labored breaths over the sinister hissing that surrounded him. His vision blurred, the world a dark, swirling nightmare of fangs and scales. With every step, the venom of the ancient viper tightened its grip, dragging him further from the light and closer to something far darker than death. Bruno knew it then. There would be no escape. But what had been set in motion beneath those cursed trees was something more terrible than mere poison. Something far older, something watching from the shadows, waiting for its moment to claim him. And there, in that forsaken place where the earth itself seemed to whisper secrets of the damned, Bruno realized he was not just fighting to live. He was battling to keep his soul from slipping into the clutches of the unknown. This is the terrifying story of the cursed bite of Joseph Bruno, the forgotten tragedy of Viper's Creek. In the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, nestled deep within the woods of Tennessee, lies a place that time has long since forgotten, a narrow, winding stretch of land known as Viper's Creek. Even now, the locals speak of it only in whispers, as if uttering its name aloud might summon the horrors that once haunted its shores. The story of Joseph Bruno, a man whose name was once known far and wide, is the reason why. It was the summer of 1893, a year remembered for its scorching heat and the deadly drought that choked the life from the land. Farmers watched helplessly as their crops withered, and the once flowing creeks turned to dry beds of cracked earth. Viper's Creek, once a lifeline to the small, isolated community nearby, had become a dangerous place, a breeding ground for snakes, their numbers swollen by the drought. Among these serpents, none was more feared than the timber rattlesnake, a creature whose bite had claimed the lives of many unwary travelers. Joseph Bruno, a farmer and a family man, had lived near Viper's Creek for most of his life. A hard-working man in his mid-30s, Joseph was known for his strength and his resilience. He had survived many trials, war, disease, and famine, but what awaited him in the dry summer of 1893 would prove to be a trial unlike any he had faced before. One sweltering afternoon, Joseph set out for the creek, determined to dig a new well. His farm, like all the others in the area, was suffering from the drought and water had become scarce. He knew the risks of venturing near the creek, everyone in town did, but he was desperate. With his wife and 2 young children depending on him, he had no choice but to push forward. As he approached the creek, the air seemed to grow still, heavy with the scent of dry earth and something more ominous, the unmistakable musk of rattlesnakes. But Joseph was not a superstitious man. He had dealt with snakes before and believed he could handle whatever danger lay ahead. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows as Joseph began to dig. The dry ground was unforgiving, and each strike of his shovel sent up clouds of dust. Hours passed, and as the sun began to dip below the horizon, a sound broke the silence. A soft, unmistakable rattle. Joseph froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that sound all too well. Slowly, he turned, his eyes scanning the ground for the source of the noise. And then he saw it, a massive timber rattlesnake, coiled and ready to strike, its tail rattling a deadly warning. Its dark, diamond-patterned scales gleamed in the fading light, and its eyes, cold and unblinking, seemed to bore into Joseph's soul. What happened next would become the stuff of legend. Joseph, in a desperate attempt to defend himself, raised his shovel and swung it at the snake. But the rattler was faster. With lightning speed, it struck, sinking its venomous fangs deep into Joseph's leg. He felt the sharp sting of the bite, followed by a burning sensation that quickly spread through his body. Panicked, Joseph dropped his shovel and clutched at his leg, trying to stop the venom from spreading, but it was too late. The snake slithered away into the shadows, leaving Joseph alone with the venom coursing through his veins. He knew he had only minutes before the poison took hold. With a strength born of sheer will, Joseph dragged himself back toward his home, each step more painful than the last. His vision blurred, and his limbs grew heavy as the venom spread, attacking his nervous system and shutting down his organs one by one. By the time he reached the edge of the woods, his skin had turned pale, and his breathing was shallow. He collapsed just yards from his front door, unable to call out for help. It was his wife, Mary, who found him. She had been waiting anxiously for his return, and when she saw his crumpled form on the ground, she rushed to his side. Joseph was barely conscious, his eyes glazed over with pain. His leg was swollen and discolored, the telltale signs of a rattlesnake bite. Mary knew there was little time. In those days, there were no antivenoms, no hospitals nearby that could provide the kind of care Joseph needed. The only hope lay in the hands of a local healer, an old woman known as Granny Wren, who lived deep in the mountains. She was a woman of mysterious origins, feared by some and revered by others. She was said to know the secrets of the earth, the herbs and roots that could cure any ailment, or so it was believed. Mary, in a frantic state, sent for Granny Wren, hoping against hope that the old woman could save her husband. Hours passed before the healer arrived, her face weathered and her eyes sharp with wisdom. She examined Joseph, her gnarled hands tracing the swollen veins that pulsed with venom. "This is no ordinary bite," Granny Wren muttered under her breath. "The snake that did this, it carries death in its blood." She worked quickly, applying a poultice of herbs and roots to the wound, chanting softly in a language Mary did not understand. But as the night wore on, it became clear that Joseph's condition was worsening. His breathing grew shallow, and his skin turned an unnatural shade of gray. The venom had spread too far, too fast. By dawn, Joseph was dead. Mary was inconsolable. She had lost not only her husband, but also her children's father, and the pain of that loss would haunt her for the rest of her life. But the story of Joseph Bruno did not end with his death. In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. It started with the rattlesnakes. The townspeople noticed an unusual number of snakes near Viper's Creek, far more than usual, and they seemed bolder, more aggressive. Farmers reported seeing them slithering through their fields, their rattles silent, as if they were stalking their prey. And then there were the dreams. Mary was the first to experience them. Nightmares filled with the sound of rattling, of serpents coiling around her, tightening their grip until she could no longer breathe. In her dreams, Joseph appeared to her, his skin pale and cold, his eyes lifeless. He would reach out to her, his lips moving as if to speak, but no sound would come. And always, just before she woke, she would hear the rattle of a snake, growing louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. Others in the town soon reported similar dreams, and whispers of a curse began to spread. Some believed that Joseph's death had angered the spirits of the land, that the snakes were acting as agents of vengeance. Others thought that Granny Wren's involvement had stirred something dark and ancient, something that could not be undone. Whatever the cause, the fear was real. The people of Viper's Creek became prisoners of their own land, too terrified to venture near the woods or the creek. The once thriving community slowly withered away as more and more families left in search of safer places to live. By the turn of the century, Viper's Creek was little more than a ghost town, its streets overgrown with weeds, its houses abandoned. But the snakes remained. To this day, those who dare to visit Viper's Creek speak of the unsettling quiet that hangs over the place, as if the land itself is holding its breath. Some say that on hot summer nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear the sound of rattlesnakes in the distance, their hissing growing louder as you approach the creek. And then there are the stories. Stories of travelers who venture too close to the woods only to disappear without a trace. Their bodies are never found, but those who search for them often report seeing strange bite marks in the underbrush, as if something is watching, waiting for its next victim. The legend of Joseph Bruno and the cursed bite of Viper's Creek has been forgotten by most, buried beneath the weight of time and progress. But for those who know the truth, who have heard the stories passed down through generations, the fear remains. Some curses, they say, never truly die.